let's talk about the Chronicles of Amber by Roger Zelazny. So the Chronicles of Amber is actually 5 short books or novellas. They're each 150 to 180 pages long. They were published between 1970 and 1978. Some were published as standalones, some were published as part works in magazines. The elevator pitch, I guess, is this. A man, who we learn fairly quickly is called Corwin, wakes up in upstate New York with memory loss, but he begins to piece together that he is a member of an aristocratic family who are actually from a parallel world called Amber. And his family has the ability to travel through the shadows, the many parallel worlds emanating out from Amber, because Amber is the centre of the universe. I mean multiverse, because as I say, these are parallel worlds. And his family is very complex and argumentative and strange, and Corwin has to piece together its many mysteries over the courses of the book, mysteries about himself, about Amber, and about his family. And so I have to keep a lot of this fairly high level, because in each of these short novels or novellas or whatever, there are a bunch of mysteries presented about the world. They come up, they are resolved. In some cases, something comes up in one book and is resolved in a later book, in the course of these many mysteries. A big thing going on with Corwin's family is that there are a lot of them. They are virtually all constantly scheming, coming up with new ploys, hiding secrets, and they all have a psychology attached to what they care about. They all have reasons for the plots they undertake, how they relate to other members of the family, the kinds of actions they take, and this all, generally speaking, really works. There are one or two of the twists or reveals that I was like, oh, okay, but we're talking about books with dozens of these, so if only a couple are flopping, then that's a pretty good hit rate. And this also applies to some of the secondary characters too, who don't even necessarily appear that often, but they are in really effective scenes. In one case, for instance, there's just a friend of Corwin on our Earth. He only comes up pretty rarely, only in a couple of cases, and it's just very, very effective and moving. And his psychology, and the mysteries he helps reveal are really well accomplished. In one case, there is a guard called Roger who is he's a part-time writer who's writing a mystical romance with morbid elements, and that means he neglects his job. So I think there's also a degree of kind of humour and inward glancing going on about the creative process, which brings me to a parallel to these books in a way. The multiversal world, like in something like The Dark Tower, and with The Dark Tower, there's a parallel certainly in the idea of a prime or original emanating out, echoes between them that are strange, sometimes fantastical, sometimes more scientific. The worlds, all these shadows, which are parallels of Amber, we think, are an early multiverse of this type. This comes certainly before The Dark Tower as an example. It comes after World of Tears, I think. It certainly comes after Harold Shea, which has a sort of multiverse, and it comes after some sci-fi that speculated on the idea. But it's an early multiverse, and we do get a few detailed glimpses of worlds, including our own world, a couple of medievalish worlds, a couple of stranger places. On the whole, though, the action revolves around Amber, not around the shadow. And Amber itself has lots of locales that you come to know a bit about over the course of the books. It has lots of weird, wonderful places that you learn about, that, kind of fantastical subworlds within Amber. And that's generally nicely drawn, but Zelazny is not a detail-oriented world builder. I talked about this. He's a texture builder. I talked about this in my Lord of Light review by him, which I really enjoyed, but which is often quite high level or gestural, or sketches something and then says, oh, that's the world, and then continues on with the thing that he wants to talk about. Individual places don't get lots of detail, but they fit into a very strong texture, a feel to the world, and the world is full of strange and magical things. And the broad strokes are watercolour, therefore. They suggest light rather than hard lines. One thing that does get a reasonable amount of attention, a lot of attention in fact, is the magic of the world. And there are, actually, it's hinted, more magics and more systems and more ideas than we see in the books. Again, it's, there's an untold depths kind of feel going on, but particularly the magic around the Amberites, those who can step through the shadows like Corwin. And there's a few different things that are established and revealed, and it's all pretty coherent, and the possibilities are explored. I wouldn't call it a hard magic system, but it's definitely not purely soft. One thing that it is that is interesting is just the aesthetics of how he puts together the magic. For instance, he uses the idea of medieval style tarot cards with trumps, which represent the members of the family and have magic powers, as well as the normal deck itself, and the mysteries behind how that came to be and how that works and its possibilities and so on come up many times in a very significant plot point, as well as a well-established magical system. And I think that's good if your systems, your kind of created speculative systems, also drive and engender plot. Finally, not quite finally, nearly finally in terms of things that I think are positive and easy to recommend, Zelazny was one of the great literary artists of his generation in sci-fi and fantasy, and he wrote both, of course. The style here is very good. He shifts tones from an almost noirish investigative tone to a more chivalrous noble tone to a dreamlike poetic tone, particularly when travelling through the shadows and in a few other cases to do with the great magics of the way the world works. There's this completely different broken dreamlike tone there to the noirish investigative tone, cynical and raised eyebrow that sometimes is, because this is first person perspective, so you get a lot of Corwin's personality coming through that way. And all that helps realise the character in the world, because the tone gives us cues as to other things and draws us into the world in different ways. And Zelazny is usually deft at moving our focus, at trailing mysteries in front of us, at sketching characterizations of characters briefly, including characters we don't actually meet for very long or who don't come up again, but who nonetheless stick in our mind. And there are also ideas in these books. There are particularly ideas around or discussions of the ideas around the nature of identity and change and stasis in the self, about the virtues of chaos and order, about family relationships, growth, change, the chance of positive change, the negative changes that happen. And this is particularly obvious in the fifth book, though somewhat it comes up more and more over the course of the books, but the only extended discussions are really in the fifth book, and tellingly this kind of connects to some of the literary art and some of the magical stuff and some of the other stuff. The only detailed, almost set piece discussions that would otherwise sound strange and forced happen in increasingly strange circumstances. It becomes natural that they're having these weird conversations. There are one or two pacing issues. I thought particularly in books 1 and 4, where Zelazny's writes, these have a pulp pace. Due to the length, they adopt a pulp pacing strategy and tropes for pulp pacing. And it meant that sometimes stuff seemed to hurry, as I say, particularly in the first and fourth book. And that's probably partly a function of the length of the individual stories and the fact he had so much he wanted to put in there. And it does mean, that's the only substantive critique I have, but it did mean a couple of times I was like, wait a second, what happened? Oh, okay, so this connects to that. Okay, did you explain that this happened like that? Just because there's a hurrying through. And the books are at their best when the compression works to concentrate and precipitate ideas rather than to rush them. But yeah, I loved it. I enjoyed all 5 books greatly. I'm not sure I think it's as good as Lord of Light, though perhaps it is. Perhaps as a whole cycle, Chronicles of Amber is as good or better than Lord of Light. But I did really enjoy it, and I recommend it to people who like some of that kind of multiversal, literary styled fantasy fiction that I've been describing. If you've read it, tell me what you think in the comments, and if there's any other multiversal books you like. Till next time.